Welcome, everybody, to our virtual series on Agile leadership, transforming ideas into actions. And we are very pleased to have with us today a great panel, and we have a moderator that I'd like to introduce. But before I do, if you are interested, if you're a member of Innovate UCLA, welcome. If you are interested in joining, please go to our website at innovateucla.org. We will also record and put our videos out on YouTube at our YouTube channel. So please feel free to go to Innovate UCLA at UCLA on YouTube. Please subscribe. We want to grow our subscriptions. We're at a whole whopping 23 and like to see that grow a little bit. And so thank you for attending, and I'm going to introduce Erica Nolting-Young as our moderator. She's a global senior manager with Slalom Consulting. And Erica, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce the panel and to get our program started.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jim. Welcome, everybody. We're glad that you could spend part of your afternoon with us today to explore the topic of Agile leadership. Leadership is the art of getting someone else to do something that you want done because he or she wants to do it, is the quote that we highlighted as we rolled out this event. It's a Dwight D. Eisenhower quote. And what we love about this quote is that these words underpin a really important aspect of being a CIO, acquiring buy-in from key stakeholders for your technology initiatives at any organization. And this ability to translate potentially transformative ideas into realizable opportunities is what's progressing innovation forward in all of our companies. It's really easy to overlook the importance of this valuable skill. It's actually an art form unto itself, and it's something that many CIOs I know we work with at my organization spend a lot of time fine-tuning. Today, I'm here with this terrific panel of leaders from academia, healthcare, local government, some former background in entertainment. We've got leaders spanning IT and business units that often partner together to explore how to employ agile leadership principles in order to gain the momentum that's needed to move projects from idea to reality. So I'll start with some introductions before we jump into our panel. Today, I am joined by Lucy Avetisyan, the Associate Vice Chancellor and CIO at UCLA, Jeff Burke, Special Assistant to the EVCP for Learning Management Systems Transformation. And Jeff has a really dynamic role that he'll tell you a little bit more about. He's got multiple titles and roles he gets to play at UCLA. We also have Kevin Gray, CIO at the City of Burbank, and Judy Wilkie, Assistant City Manager for City of Burbank, and Michael Bacharach, the Associate VP Technology Solutions from Humana. Welcome all, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Erica.
Good to be here.
Thanks. I'll start by just asking each of you to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your roles and your background to help lay the context for today's conversation, and we'll kick off with Lucy.
Thank you, Erica. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. As Erica mentioned, I am the Associate Vice Chancellor and Chief Information Officer at UCLA. I joined the university 14 months ago. In May of 2020 during COVID. It's been a very exciting journey for me. I am in a new role for the university. Prior to my arrival, there were two CIOs, one that focused on administration, another on academia, and that role has now been combined. And it's an interesting challenge to kind of reimagine IT for UCLA. Prior to joining UCLA, I was at USC for over 20 years in numerous IT roles. And my last role has been the Deputy CIO, partnering and leading the digital transformation for USC. It's great to be here with you, and I'll pass it over to Erica.
And we can just keep running straight through the line of panelists. Maybe I'll pass the baton next to Jeff.
Hi, I'm Jeff Burke. I'm a professor in the theater department. I've been at UCLA since I was a student, actually in electrical engineering and later in film and television. My focus is on how emerging technologies impact storytelling in a number of different ways, but I think I'm here because of a campus-wide role that I have in collaboration with Lucy, which is to work on the move of our learning management system from one platform to another, which of course affects everybody on campus. And so I'm happy to be here in that role.
Terrific. And Kevin?
My name is Kevin Gray. I am CIO for the city of Burbank. I've been here a little over 3 years. Prior to the city of Burbank, I spent a lifetime in media at DreamWorks, well, going Orion Pictures, DreamWorks, Paramount Pictures, Viacom, various roles really centered around IT infrastructure, if you will, media and technology infrastructure. So now here at the city, I kind of view my role as being accountable for all things technology and process improvement for the city of Burbank. I'm not sure that that is what the city manager and the assistant city manager hired me for, but that's the role I'm trying to carve out for myself here.
Thank you, Kevin. And Judy?
Good afternoon, everyone. I have been with the city. I'm celebrating 30 years this year. And since I've been with the city, I have been in a variety of roles. Most recently, it was our Parks and Recreation Director. Prior to that, I was our HR Director, and I've spent time in finance. And I was also our elected city clerk at one point, ran twice for that office while working for the city. So it's been a fantastic career, and I've loved every minute of working in local government. I currently, as the assistant city manager, my role is to really support the city manager who reports directly to our elected city council. And then I also have the pleasure of being able to work directly with all of our departments and ensuring that we're meeting our goals and our objectives, doing the things that we need to be doing to run the city, and just making sure that Burbank is better every single day. So I love my job and happy to be celebrating 30 years and happy to be here today with all of you.
Thanks, Judy, and congrats on 30 years. If anyone needs to know anything about the city of Burbank, call Judy. And last but not least, Michael.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Bacharach. I work at Humana Healthcare as an Associate Vice President for their contact centers and knowledge management solutions. I too am having an anniversary of sorts of next week. I've been there for 6 months, so I'm going to be celebrating my 6-month anniversary really shortly here too. So it's been quite interesting being part of an organization based in Kentucky, living in Los Angeles and onboarding to this massive company of Humana Healthcare. It's been great. It's been a great learning experience, and I'm really excited to help them through their digital transformation, their agile transformation that they're doing. So I'm really looking forward to that. Previously, I've worked at Fox Studios for 20 some odd years with a brief stint at Disney. After that, as part of the merger and acquisition that I'm sure you're all aware of, at Fox, I was the Senior Vice President of IT. I reported to the CIO in charge of the studio, and I led the IT groups related to global theatrical distribution, global home entertainment distribution, and the physical and digital supply chains, which was really, really cool. If you think 20 years back, VHS was the method of delivery of content to your home. 35 millimeter was the method of delivering content to the theater, and you all know what it is today. And I was able to be fortunate enough to go on that journey with Fox for those 20 years. So I'm appreciative of that, and thank you all for having me.
Thank you all. So let's dive in on questions, and just as a quick reminder to everyone participating today, if you have questions throughout today's panel, feel free to use the chat, and our program manager, Rafi, who's helping produce today's event, will be searching for questions to make sure he raises them. Another way you can ask a question is to use the raise your hand function, and Rafi will help spot those for me as well. So I can look for a spot to pause and get in any great questions that you have. So you can ask via chat, or if you want to ask your question live, we'll try and accommodate that as well. So let's dive in. Having the agility that you need as a leader to be able to move initiatives ahead in your organization when they come about starts with having the right relationships in place with the right leaders. So when you need to call on those relationships to get things done, you can. So Kevin, how do you go about building relationships with your peers, stakeholders, and superiors at the City of Burbank?
Well, Erica, there's a lot that goes into building relationships, and I don't think I could possibly cover it all today, but there are 3 key principles that I employ that I'd like to highlight. First, personal connection, then trust, then meet your partners where they are. So Judy called me out earlier this week on one of my tactics that is a key component of my personal connection principle, and that is I take people to lunch or a happy hour or whatever social setting that I can convince them to join me in. And I try to do it often. I endeavor to build a personal connection with them. I have to say that the greatest accomplishments that I've achieved with others in my career have always been accomplished with people that I feel I can call my friends as well as my coworkers. I can usually find a personal connection even with people that might feel like a complete mismatch personally. The truth is we all have something in common, even with those we may feel are completely different than us. Maybe it's food, maybe it's beer, maybe it's wine, maybe it's golf, maybe it's sports, maybe it's politics, maybe it's our young children, maybe it's our adult children, family difficulties, hiking, cycling, or whatever. I list all of these things because these are things that I found in common with my peers here at the city. We can find something in common, and that helps form a personal connection to fuel that relationship. So next is trust. I work hard to build and maintain credibility. Credibility is a recurring theme with me and my leadership team. Credibility is a currency that is more valuable than Bitcoin, in my humble opinion. Credibility has been a focus of mine since the early 2000s, but I recently learned quite a bit more about it in reading The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. The Speed of Trust was recommended to me by the general manager of our utility, Burbank Water and Power, also known as BWP. Her name is Dawn Roth Lindale, so I want to send her a shout out. She's one of my newer personal connections. So Stephen Covey writes that there are 4 cores of credibility: integrity, intent, capabilities, and results. Anyway, I implore everyone to read the book to get a deeper understanding of these 4 cores. So last is meet your partners where they are. The city of Burbank has 15 different departments, which is like 15 different businesses. A police department is nothing like, an organization of libraries, which is nothing like a power and water utility. When I started with the city of Burbank, I found a huge chasm in trust in IT from all the executives of the city, but at differing levels. Also, while some departments worked with IT for specific technology services, for example, finance worked with IT for the city's ERP services. Other departments were not accustomed at all to working with IT for their technology needs, except for maybe, typical service desk support. An example of that would be our community development department for parking management solutions, right? They didn't work with IT. Or Burbank Water and Power, who had really largely disengaged from IT decades earlier. So I've had to approach each situation with each department differently because of where they were, and still because of where they are today in my quest to try to build lasting, trusted partner relationships with them.
Thank you, Kevin. So I know you're close with Judy. I'm going to turn the tables here and ask Judy the other side of this question. Within your unit of the city of Burbank, how does the tactics that Kevin uses to build relationship work with your team? What's worked well? What have you learned together over time about what doesn't work, and how to tweak and adjust that approach to really make sure the right trust and relationships exist?
I cannot underscore what a breath of fresh air Kevin has been to our organization. Having been here for 30 years, I've gone through a lot of IT directors, and it has not always been a partnership, and it has not always been effective. As a matter of fact, the city departments were generally on their own, looking for their own technology, sometimes not thinking about the fact that technology could solve some problems for them. And so there was really all 15 departments were doing what they wanted, and it was not good, and it was not something that we were doing together. Some of us had technology that others had, and we didn't know it. Like, we could have used something that, the police department had in, another department, or community development, or whatever the case may be. So what I can tell you is that since Kevin has gotten here, he has worked really hard to create a feeling of care and concern for his partners. He treats us like we are partners in this. And that is so important for us to know that he cares and that he's concerned, and his team is as well, about what it is that we're doing and how can we do it better and more effectively. And that is the first time that we've ever had IT at the table trying to be our partner. Trust and credibility has been lacking the entire 30 years that I've been here in our CIO as well as the department. So I think it's going to always take time to change a culture, to change perceptions and all of that. But Kevin and his team is doing a great job to get in and show everyone that they want to be involved, that they want to be helpful, that they know what they're talking about, and they're doing their research and their work to come back and give us solutions that will actually make us better and more effective at what we do. So what I can say is that we're slowly shifting that culture. Local government doesn't work real quick, but we are doing that. And I think that what Kevin has brought to the city of Burbank is completely exactly what was needed. And we are in such a better place now than we were 3 years ago before Kevin got here. So yes, he's effective, and what he's brought to us has been amazing and was definitely needed.
Thank you, Judy. And I'm sure Kevin's smarts and big heart are going a long way with the people in the city of Burbank. Lucy, I want to explore this a little bit with you as well. You joined UCLA in the middle of this pandemic, which meant joining an organization and working remotely from the beginning, which probably presented some new and unique challenges in terms of building relationships. I know Michael's been experiencing this also over at Humana. What's it been like in this past year, building relationships with people from afar? And how have you tried to overcome any of the challenges that have come with that as you stepped into a role with your work really cut out for you in the education environment with all the change that's come upon us?
Thank you. That's a great question. And certainly stepping into a CIO role has its challenges, and I'm coming from an institution where I've been all my career. So, and relationships and trust and partnerships mean so much in any role you're in. But specifically coming to UCLA during the COVID crisis has been a challenging experience. And the way I approached it, I dedicated my first 2 months in learning and listening and trying to get to know the leadership of the university, also the IT partners and my team. I started with having one-on-one meetings with every vice chancellor, vice provost, every dean. And I had 3 questions for them: what was working, what was not, and what they wanted to partner with me to accomplish. And I learned a lot through that experience. I also had an opportunity to meet with the IT leaders throughout the campus. We have 40 plus distributed IT units at UCLA. So meeting and learning as much as I could in such a short time about what was going on and what were their challenges. Also learning about the team. I would have loved to have the opportunity to do this in person, maybe over lunch or over a drink, but this is all we had. We had Zoom rooms and we had 30 minutes to spend together. I can't wait to actually get to meet these individuals in person. Jeff and I have never been in a room together other than Zoom rooms, obviously, but so I think there was no other way to kind of prepare for what I had to do to support the organization without getting to know how it's structured, how it operates, because it's very different than a private organization private institution that I'm coming from. The public institution is quite different. So I had a lot of learning to do. I think ultimately what has been the best part of this experience is really listening and trying to help the stakeholders throughout the campus to help them with whatever they're trying to accomplish by identifying IT solutions or partnership opportunities. And I'm looking forward to continuing that partnership and hopefully doing some of that in person soon.
I hope you get to do it soon too. In the interim, there's something probably really valuable that we can learn from the experience we've had here. Some of us saw the headline today that AWS just announced that their employees won't be returning to the office until at least 2022. I suspect we'll hear more of this from other organizations. So remote work is here to stay, and we know people move between jobs with higher frequency than 10 years ago. So a lot of us might have the experience of stepping into new roles, new jobs, new companies, and having to build relationships with new people from afar for the first time. So Jeff, what was it about the way that you connected with Lucy that really told you this is someone special who I need to pay attention to and partner with? Because I know you've had a great relationship coming out the gates here with Lucy. What can we learn from what worked well there that we can all emulate?
Well, I think something that we were lucky to have was another person on our leadership team that we both respected and created the connection. And unfortunately, she's not with us anymore. But that was, that went a long way to operating in this kind of remote environment where you don't have a chance to maybe build those informal connections as quickly. It was really helpful to have this person who was mutually respected and provided that bridge between us. And I think in kind of reflecting on the challenges that have existed in the remote environment is coming from, the academic enterprise at like the faculty level is often, quite removed from the leadership of an enterprise-wide organization like the one that we see overseas. And so I think the part that I've missed and maybe we'll be working on in the pandemic is trying to get a better sense of the organizational context that she's in. If I were going to her office and walking through and interacting with the people that work with her, I would get a lot more sense of her day to day. And so I rely also on knowing some of her colleagues and some of the folks that work with her and trying to infer, what a busy or difficult day is for her from those interactions. And I kind of also, as a faculty member, and, I hear complaints about central organizations that I'm now working with, and I get sort of that it's actually really helpful to understand as best I can the context that she's in. But I think I do miss that context of actually physical presence in the environment that somebody's working with, a better understanding of the colleagues that comes from those kind of informal interactions. And I think everyone that's spoken already, touched on the key to informal, the sort of key that personal relationships and informal connections play. And I feel like I haven't quite cracked that, not in terms of how to work in the pandemic, mostly because we're both very busy. And I think we work very effectively remotely, so we're able to move forward. But I do miss that ability to maybe more quickly build an informal shorthand about how to lead together. But I think we've done a pretty good job in the context.
Yeah, some good takeaways there. Mutual connections and opportunities to connect on a more personal level. I know for sure I've been trying to find time to do this one-on-one with my teammates, to find little 15-minute segments of the day where we can just connect and talk about friends, family, life. Really does go a long way. Let's pivot and talk a little bit about the process to getting the green light for a big technology initiative. Michael, I'm going to shift to you. You bring some really great perspective, and having spent a very large part of your career at 20th Century Fox, where you led major transformation initiatives, and now you're over at Humana, and it's a different culture, a different industry, a different technology subset that you're working with. What does that road or path to obtaining approval and buy-in look like? Maybe you can compare and contrast and tell us a little bit about how that might be different or unique at these different organizations. and what you've learned from moving from one organization to the other that might be helpful to others as they figure out how to navigate getting to the green light for their initiatives.
Yeah, thanks for asking, Erica. So speaking about Fox first, I think it's a little bit more of the same of what everyone was saying about building those relationships. And obviously at Fox, I had the benefit of having some of those relationships when these big initiatives came my way, so to speak. But what I want to kind of add, I think, is the context and the content of those conversations you have to build those relationships. So for example, very often you find technology people speaking technology speaks, so to say, right? With no understanding of the business, no understanding of the other person walking in their shoes and things like that, right? So I think it's super important, right, that you bring that credibility, as Kevin said, to the table, right? Which is, all right, take a second to understand the business and the perspective of the other person, right? So for me, that relationship building was really focused on that. And that got me the trust and the credibility with my partners in the business, right, to go on this journey with me, whatever the project might have been, right? So this is all at Fox. And I think at the end of the day, I think it comes down, the proof is in the pudding to some extent, right? You need to demonstrate that your heart is in it, that you own the project, right? And you're not just doing it to check something off the list, so to speak, but you're in it for the right reasons. You're in it because the project is delivering business value and you're using technology to enable the delivery of that value. And then you have to be accountable, right? You certainly need to be accountable, not just for yourself, right, but the people that are on your team, right? And so to enable that accountability for delivery and being successful as it puts what I kind of call credits in the bank, so to speak, which gets you to that next step or that next relationship or the next project. So that relationship and demonstrating business value is critical, and being able to have the conversation from a business perspective and not a technology perspective is super important. So let's translate that to Humana, right? 6 months, healthcare. There's not too much I knew about healthcare. And honestly, I was wondering, why did they hire me? So I get there and I think I kind of understood it, right? I think somewhere along that interview process, they got that sense about relationship building is key to moving projects forward, right? So, and, you know, if you think about healthcare, they're kind of going through a little bit of a metamorphosis as well, digital transformation, kind of sort of like the media and entertainment space did maybe 10 years ago, right? Not the same business, mind you, but still, it's a digital transformation in some respect. So bringing that knowledge to bear and taking the same approach, to your point, Erica, I'm taking the same approach that everyone said about building these relationships. So how do I do that? Being in Los Angeles, people most of the corporation is in Kentucky. We have people, there are some key executives in Atlanta. There are key executives in Milwaukee and Florida, right? So how do you do that? And let alone my team members, I haven't met a soul, right? So how do you do that, right? So I take the time and I've evolved this concept that I've had called walking the decks. It's an old naval term, I think, about a commander who, there's a difference between a commander who sits up in the perch and looks down on the ship, right, versus the commander who comes off the perch, goes onto the deck, walks the decks and see how people are doing and what they think, right, what their passion is. So I've been doing that in a virtual way by setting up conversations with small groups of people, 4 to 5 people, and not as a like, oh, by the way, let's chat, but just make it a little bit more formal, right? Sit down, tell them why you're there. You want to learn what about their job. You want to learn about their business. You want to learn what they're doing, right? So it's kind of seek first to understand in the virtual world, I would say.
Love it. And I'm glad to hear that all of the years that you spent building relationships at Fox to make a huge impact is translating really nicely over at Humana. Kevin, how about for you? What does that path to approval or buy-in look like in your role?
Well, I certainly hope that the concept of relationships is getting through. So, everything that we've all talked about earlier applies here. However, beyond that, I'd like to talk a little bit about, one of my early accomplishments here at the city was to establish a new governance framework via an executive steering committee here at the city. So I took what was previously an executive committee that received periodic updates on projects large and small, and was largely ineffective for much of anything. At least that's how it was described to me by the city manager at the time. And I turned it into a working committee that is responsible for establishing policy and priorities for all technology for the city. The committee is codified into city policy, approved by the executive policy committee, and signed by the city manager. So the committee reviews and provides oversight for the IT department's finances, staffing, policies, our priorities. I chair the committee. The city manager and assistant city manager are voting members of the committee, as well as every department head of the city. We also have associate members that are there to inform and advise, but have no voting rights. Associate members include my leadership staff, key individuals from various departments in the city, like the Burbank Water and Power CTO, the Assistant Community Development Director responsible for transportation and planning, the Public Works Capital Projects Program Manager, and others. So that committee decides what initiatives are greenlit and what is prioritized by a majority vote. Of course, the city manager has a veto power for any decisions made by the committee. There's also an appeals process if someone is unhappy with a committee decision. However, codified into the charter establishing the committee is that all members of the committee must give full unequivocal support for the decisions of the committee unless the decision is reversed on appeal. Members of their departments shall not bypass, circumvent, or otherwise interfere with the decisions of the committee. This is codified into the charter. So for us, that committee gives us, IT, the real and perceived buy-in and authority citywide on our technology initiatives.
Nice. Thank you, Kevin. On this note about organizing an executive steering committee, it's a good place to start to explore a little more with others about how you organize your initiatives in each of your respective organizations in order to maximize your chances for success. So Lucy, how have you organized governance and execution for your initiatives at UCLA in order to maximize success?
Yeah, so I can relate to what Kevin was talking about, rethinking the overarching IT governance. And that's something that I'm very focused on. I'm working with an advisory committee to think through how to best introduce a IT governance model for UCLA, but specifically related to the LMS transformation program that Jeff and I are partnering in the implementation. We came together with the third program owner that Jeff mentioned earlier to think through how to best identify the best representatives throughout the campus who could be part of the 3 governing bodies that we created for this program specifically. First, it was a steering committee that could guide us as it related to key decisions, overarching decisions related to teaching and learning or education technologies. This included deans, associate vice chancellors, vice provosts, and this was more on a strategic level. And then we have an advisory group that has key stakeholders, again, from all different groups throughout the campus, including faculty, including students, who are advising us on key decisions related to this implementation. We also put together a group that is assisting us with identifying the platforms that we are integrating our campus solution with to provide a more robust teaching and learning experience for our students and faculty. So 3 different groups. We made sure that we have the right representation in each group, but that we captured a diverse population throughout the organization to make sure that this decision isn't just made by IT or by Jeff and or one teaching and learning group, that it has diverse representation, and faculty voice is extremely important. So we have a lot of faculty members in our committees as well. And we work very closely with these groups. We meet, I believe, monthly with them. We have agendas and prior documentation that we're asking them to share, and truly provide some guidance and advice as to how we move forward with this transformational effort.
Thank you, Lucy. And I'm going to skip to Michael next. Michael, a slightly different spin on this question. I know you led this major cloud transformation project at Fox, and within that project were a lot of individual application projects that affected different business units of the organization. How did you manage the governance and the steering committee for that size of an initiative that crossed so many different parts of the organization, some which work together, others which don't? Did you try and keep a collective means of communicating about the initiative throughout the life of it, or really focus in department by department?
Yeah, good question, Erica. I think it would be first to set the landscape, right? Because it was beyond the borders of Los Angeles, beyond the borders of the country, right? This was a global initiative that you're talking about for our global theatrical group. And we had locations in 60 countries. They released 25 films a year. So think about the scale of that when you move from 35 millimeter, like I said before, to digital, all the different media formats that you have, the localization activities that you have, the dubbing activities that you have, the marketing activities you have, the finance pieces to it, right? The sales pieces to it, right? Those numbers start to get large when you look around the world. And we were kind of challenged with, do we really want to go out and get everyone's opinion? Right? And to be honest, right, not everyone's opinion, take this with a grain of salt, not everyone's opinion was the same, right? And when I mean the same, in terms of authority, level of understanding, impact that they would have on the business, right? So we had to come up with some of these committees, right, that you've just heard about, that would be impactful. So we started with a group of key stakeholders. We called it our executive stakeholders. It was a cross-functional group, global leaders from marketing, finance, and operations and sales, all those different departments from around the world. And honestly, I think there were 10 to 15 people, if I remember correctly, that were part of that group. So if you think about the scale, right, that's not that many. Then we said, from an operations perspective, from a weekly or a bi-weekly kind of methodology, who did we want to meet with, right? We called that an operational committee, right? And those were probably from an executive +1 or +2 level down. That we got together, got direction from them, and they actually made most of the decisions about where the project was headed. Now, not everyone always agreed, right? So we actually had to have an escalation path, right? So obviously we went to the key stakeholders, that committee too, right? But you still get into that conversation of finance or marketing first, is sales more important than the operations group, right? And things of that nature. So at the end of the day, we had a key decision maker. He happened to be the president of the division. And if things got escalated, right, he would decide. And people knew that. So that the number of times that things got escalated to him was far and few in between. So we had, I would say, a pretty successful rollout. We were able to drive change and process improvement. We took a very simple approach to building out the application in terms of the user experience. We couldn't train all these people around the world. We had a motto of it needs to be like a banking application to some extent in terms of usability. No one trains someone who signs up for their banking app, right, on how to use it. So we tried to do that as much as possible. We got input from key countries around the world, 3 in Europe, 2 in Asia Pac, and 1 in Latin America as well. So we were able to be fairly successful with that approach.
Love it. It was one of the neatest things when I was collaborating with you at that point in time. And I tell everyone, gosh, Michael Bacharach told me that all of the stakeholders really are in alignment with IT. And I thought every CIO tells you that. What I don't know is that their business sometimes tells me something different on the other side. And lo and behold, when I went around Fox and met with each of the business stakeholders, they were so excited to tell me all about the things that they were working with IT on and how they were leading it. So I know what you were doing was really effective, and it was exciting and sort of tickled me pink to find out that there was a CIO who actually really knew that his relationship building with the business had paid off in a big way. Kevin and Michael, maybe you can just touch briefly on Scale Agile framework. Both of you mentioned as we were preparing for this session that you've adopted some of the prescriptions from SAFe in terms of how you organize within your IT department to execute on an initiative, but that you're not diehards. You don't feel the need to take every single aspect of SAFe and apply it just as it is written into that framework or approach. So what are the things that you have felt are really effective? What are some of the things that you very specifically left behind and chose not to adopt from Scale Agile framework? Kevin, maybe you can start.
Well, I'll start by saying that everybody should always remember that a framework is a framework and it's not really a prescription. And so I take that into account with every framework that we choose to adopt. SAFe talks about aligning teams around value as opposed to organizing according to function, which is a very traditional way of organizing an IT department. SAFe doesn't say, throw out traditional hierarchical organization that is based on function, like, you have your application development teams, you may have your DBA team, your networking team, your system admin team, or whatever. It says to keep that organization, but overlay that organization by building cross-functional teams that include all of the functions necessary to bring specific value to the customer. The idea behind it is that a long-standing team that includes all of the functions necessary to deliver along a value stream can deliver that value faster than a group that is tossing work between functional teams to get the final value that is being delivered to the customer. Now that looks different. What that looks like is different for every organization. For example, a company that develops digital products may have cross-functional agile teams that include the product managers, the DBAs, the server admins, developers, et cetera, that are needed to bring a particular product to market. For us, I think that looks different. We'll organize around operational value streams. For example, we'll have a cross-functional agile team that is organized around law enforcement, anchored by the product owner that is responsible for the law enforcement technology product suite. And that team will focus on any initiative in the law enforcement value stream. So we sort of adopted the concept, maybe not exactly, like, an Amazon might adopt it, but I think it's something that, is going to work for us. It's new for us, but I think it'll work well for us.
Thank you. There's another thing that we talked about a little bit in preparation for today that was sort of fun to dig into, which is, should product owners or product managers reside in IT or out in the business? And I know this is a popular question to explore. If you ever go onto LinkedIn and you look up opportunities for product owners or product managers in any of the major tech hubs of the United States, it's one of the hottest jobs out there. So it tells you either IT teams are hiring this role like crazy or business units are. And with the volume of these opportunities that exist, my bet would be it's a lot of business units that are starting to hire those roles. So Lucy, how do you manage this at UCLA? What's your recommendation and why? What have you learned from maybe trying both of these over the course of your career?
Good question. Thank you. So we do have a product manager role for the learning management system. And let's just talk about the role itself. It's the person in this role is, in my mind, responsible for the entire product lifecycle and the product roadmap. And oftentimes, especially if we're implementing a software as a service solution, I think it's even more important to have a dedicated resource who truly understands the technology roadmap and the product lifecycle. I am recommending that this role resides within IT services, but is in the individual in this role closely works with our functional side. I think of the individuals in this kind of role, they're responsible for many activities that kind of span from strategic to tactical, and they provide important cross-functional leadership. So it's not just a technologist. I don't think just a technologist would be successful in this role. I also want to share with you that I believe the people who are going to be successful in this role really understand the intersection of the functional needs, the technology roadmap, but then they can also focus on end user experience. And so I'm excited that we now have this role for our LMS transformation, and that the individual is very much connected with the teaching and learning side, but also is learning the platform capabilities and all the other products that are going to be interfacing with this Canvas solution, and is very focused on how our user experience is going to be offered to the campus during the implementation and post go live.
Thank you. We've talked a little bit about building relationships, getting buy-in so you can get that green light, and now how to organize an initiative to maximize your chances of success. Let's go back to the beginning for a second and talk about, where did these initiatives even come from? How do they start? We see the seeds of opportunities and companies really coming from different places and different organizations. This comes from different places. So Judy, when you think about the city of Burbank, how does a city initiative start, and what role does the CIO play in the early stages of an initiative?
Well, the city used to literally, each department would create their own initiatives. They would budget for them, and then they would start to implement them. And what would end up happening is you would find out at some point you need IT to be involved. And so we would completely tax them because they didn't know we were doing the projects. They weren't involved. They had no idea what was happening. And so literally nothing would get done, or those who, screamed the loudest would get something done, right? So what Kevin explained earlier is we now have this executive steering committee where literally as a team, we're making decisions. Like if you have something that you want to initiate, it needs to come to that team, and we need to agree that it's a priority for our organization. And if it's a priority for our organization, then we're going to, if it's 5 or 6 of them, we'll prioritize them, and we'll all agree in what order those are going to go and what resources will be expended on them. And so Kevin has been invaluable in that process because, like I said, we weren't getting things done before. And if we were getting things done, it wasn't done very well. And so now we've got this centralized process where as a team, we're making these decisions. So we're working together for the betterment of the organization. And I think that, he's been invaluable in that with his team. Because without him coming to the organization, we'd still be doing what we were doing a few years ago. So I think we're much more effective, and we're actually seeing results. And before we were not seeing results. And I think it's just been really a great process that he's brought to our organization.
Yeah, Judy pointed to something that we see often from a consulting vantage point that's changing in every organization, that technology is becoming a critical part of what everybody does in any organization. It's pretty hard to go too far down the path of a project before you realize that you need IT. And so certainly this has become ever more true in education. Jeff, how has technology modernization changed how academia looks at IT and how you've interacted with the technology organization?
It's a really good and interesting question because academia, of course, especially at a university like UCLA, is not monolithic, right? There's a research mission, a teaching and learning mission, a service and public mission, and all of those have different requirements and uses of IT. And so at a research level, the first packets on the ARPANET were sent from a lab at UCLA. And so there's incredible depth of technology, knowledge, and interest in innovation, a lot of which carried over into the local innovations that faculty are doing on an everyday basis with their classes and reflect their way of picking and choosing the best tools to teach, what to teach their classes. And I think what's interesting now is, of course, this is intersecting with just a completely different IT landscape, where to deliver reliable performance services for a huge user base in a way that is secure and reliable and kind of manages the university's risk as a big institution is a different undertaking. And it intersects with each of those three different parts of the university in sort of unique ways. And I think one of the most exciting things, I think, and not one we always get to talk about a lot, I think, as we're focused on, this initiative that Lucy talked about a little bit, is how the dialogue between the innovation that happens in those at the faculty level in those areas can be supported while still trying to figure out how to provide these enterprise services. I think one change that I think Lucy hinted at in the word experience and user experiences there is critical, which is student expectations for delivery and interaction with the organization, and also faculty and staff, though, have evolved, right? The tools that students are using outside of school sometimes are incredibly sophisticated collaboration tools that are offered, by major players like everyone else, I think. And so their expectations for what we can offer and what is available enterprise-wide have changed and require a different institutional support. But I think there are still some really fascinating opportunities for the future in these intersections with other local innovation that happens at the university.
Yeah, absolutely. We spend a lot of time talking about user experience and ultimately putting the consumer or the user at the center of every decision you have to make, whether it's public or private, big company or small organization. I see we're coming down to the last 5 minutes here, so I'm going to skip around on questions here and just pick one or two more to wrap us up so we can leave time for Rafi or Jim to tell us about the upcoming events for Innovate at UCLA. So Michael, when we talk about Agile leadership, a key component is the word Agile. I know there's this opportunity to take principles from Agile and apply them to the way that you lead through a project. One of those principles that we learn about really early in learning about Agile is continuous learning. Can you talk a little bit about how continuous learning has helped you evolve projects over time, and maybe some things you learned along the way that were working well, things that maybe weren't working so well, and how you pivoted using those learnings throughout the course of an initiative?
Yeah, sure. I think it comes down to the feedback loop, to be honest, right? The old way of working in a waterfall approach, right, is you would get some requirements up front, you'd go off into IT land, right, build something for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, right? Come back, and then you'd show your user base what you've built, and there'd be a disconnect a lot of times. Not all the time, but a lot of times there would be this disconnect, right? So the big learning that I have is how taking the Agile approach with that feedback loop into the sprint cycle and bringing it forward, right? So that if you have your 2-week sprint or your 4-week sprint, depending upon how you adopt the what did Kevin say, the framework, right, to your own needs, right? If you go to that 2-week or 4-week sprint, you're getting feedback as you go along. So at the end of the day, the product that comes out of those sprints will be something that is not surprising to the end user, right? So that bringing that feedback loop forward is so key to, I think, any Agile delivery, continuous learning kind of environment.
Thank you. And I think we have time for just one more. So I'm going to throw one more question over to you, Lucy. And this is a nod to all of my consulting services comrades who might be listening in today. Lucy, how do you and the organization do resource planning for larger initiatives? And how often do you bring in outside help to do a project? How do you think about making those decisions?
Yeah, Great question, and not always an easy decision. I think ultimately it starts with defining the roles that are going to be needed for the project to be successful and the type of skills and experiences that are going to ensure that we're successful upon go live. Our approach, at least for this project, has been to look within UCLA and identify resources within UCLA because it gives them a growth opportunity, an opportunity to learn a new platform and really think about how to transform what we're doing at UCLA. And then we try to look outside of well, we also look throughout UCs and give our peer institutions opportunities to be part of this. But then we looked outside and tried to hire resources. And then the roles that we were unable to fill successfully, that's where we identified partner organizations, consulting firms that could come and help. And what we're specifically looking for were people to come in and join in advisory capacity who could really help us learn how to do this well and enable us to be successful upon go live, and really rely on resources who had significant experience and expertise in implementing Canvas solutions and or designing these kinds of platforms. So my goal has always been to have as many internal resources as possible, but also to selectively identify external resources who have done this successfully before and are really good at it to come and help us through the implementation. 80-20 rule, 80 internal, 20 external. Sometimes that changes, but ultimately I want to make sure our own people are enabled to be successful when we're live.
Love it. Thank you. So there you have it, folks. You've had the chance today to hear from this diverse set of leaders who work in different facets of the public and private sector about how they get buy-in, how they build relationships, how they organize for success, and how they think about staffing key initiatives with their own folks, as well as help from the inside and outside. It is just so easy in the work that everyone here does as technology leaders to get really wrapped up in the technology and the innovation, the problem solving. But before you get to that part of the project, there are so many key steps that you need to take as a leader to make sure that your initiative will get the buy-in that it needs to be successful, that you'll continue to have that buy-in and support throughout the course of the program, especially for some of those larger distributed and global initiatives. I hope you found today some terrific leaders that you can reach out to for advice should you want to bounce some ideas around. And I hope that you'll join our community at Innovate at UCLA to connect with other leaders like those you heard from today. I know this crew here has been instrumental to my growth in figuring out how to secure buy-in for initiatives with my other clients and within my organization. Jim, I'll pass it over to you so you can tell the group a little bit about some of our upcoming events. Thanks, everyone.
So if you look at it on your screen is our next events, and we look forward to, for those who can attend, we look forward to you doing that. I also would like to, because I think I forgot to say this in Erica's introduction, that she's the chairperson of our program committee. And so she's put together a wonderful set of events for the remainder of the year. And plus our big event, our Executive Leadership Awards Dinner that we plan to have in person and online. And so we look forward to those events. We look forward to talking to you in the future. Please give us feedback, any ideas that you have for other events, please feel free to let me know. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Wonderful thank you to our panel. Thank you so much for being here today. And Erica, thank you for excellent moderation. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week.